Kaimere is a distant planet. It is defined by waves of life brought from Earth and set free to evolve independently in this new context. The indigenous life of the planet, swarms of microbes called magic by the people who live there, are what harvest Earth organisms and make copies on Kaimere. As the asteroid which concluded the Mesozoic never struck Kaimere, dinosaurs remain the dominant terrestrial megafauna. Ants are a clade of eusocial wasp, in which most individuals lose, remove, or never even grow their wings. On Earth, there are over 20,000 estimated species, and they can make up as much as 20% of animal biomass, a staggering abundance. They can be readily identified by elbowed antennae. These social animals range in social structure from a loose band of predators to complex colonies with various individuals specializing in different roles and populations in the millions. As one might expect, ants didn't begin their evolutionary journey with modern abundance. Back on Earth, during the early Cretaceous, ants appear to have primarily lived in the former structure, with only a few individuals hunting together on the forest floor. They usually make up around 1% of insects found in amber at the time, a fraction of their current proportions. Most famous of these are the hell ants, which appear to have been specialized predators of other insects, using an apparatus of upward-facing pincers against a horn-like cranial ornamentation to catch and kill prey. Hell ants likely lived in small groups of less than 100 individuals and may have hunted alone. There were a few other ants which lived in relatively sophisticated colonies, but this was not the norm. It was not until after the proliferation of flowering plants spiked following the asteroid impact at the end of the Cretaceous that ants really took off in abundance and diversity of species, diet, and social structure. It was this rapid adaptive radiation, and many of the lineages and lifestyles common today appeared shortly after the extinction. The hell ants appear to have gone extinct on Earth well before the asteroid impact, but they persisted in the forests of Kaimere. Only one species is found in the known world today, the crocodile ant, which is generally restricted to the jungles and wetlands of the Crescent. Given its similarities to a species in southern Kyrule, assembly naturalists believe it is a recent migrant, perhaps carried to Nikar on floating vegetation. There is no particularly common, and don't travel in large groups, though they are voracious and quite successful when hunting whipcraw, wasps, termites, and other ants. Crocodile ants are the largest ant, and indeed largest wasp species of Kaimere, with the largest specimens exceeding 3 inches in length. In Kaimere, where no asteroid hit and flowering plants had a much more gradual spread, ants mostly remained in small troop predator niche, with a few small colony-dwelling lineages of herbivores and omnivores being found in dense rainforests. Even these were never particularly abundant, often being vastly outnumbered by conifer mites and whipcraw in the forests, and termites out on the fern prairies. Some were brought during the Oligocene harvest, but since the flora of this age was not impacted by the minor extinction which caused the harvest, these Oligocene ants did not appear to have had much success. The dynastic extinction, triggered by flood basalt nearly 15 million years ago, leveled many habitats, though the devastation was not as substantial as it was on Earth 66 million years ago with the asteroid impact. As plants recovered, flowering plants bounced back faster than their higher nutrient landscape left by the volcanic ash. With higher soil pH, angiosperms tended to do much better as they were trying to edge out on the more acidic soils of gymnosperm-dominated habitats. In the angiosperm-dominated forests, which spread across the known world, especially after the mid-Miocene harvests from North and South America, these were given an opportunity which the ants accepted with gusto. The leafcutter, or attine ant, found a land of plenty with minimal competition in the humid angiosperm rainforests of the known world. Though they can't actually digest the leaves they are named after, they collect and feed these to fungi, which they can eat in a process quite like that of the mold builder termites. On Earth, leafcutter ants seem to have domesticated or at least depended on fungi very shortly after the asteroid impact 66 million years ago. The conditions after impact would have prevented ants from hunting or foraging, but fungi growing in their burrows or whatever detritus the ants brought to them may well have been the catalyst for the relationship. By the time they arrived in Kaimere, these relationships were long established and quite sophisticated, going from a wild fungi to truly dependent domestication, and allowed ants to effectively create a niche and slot themselves into forest ecosystems without competition. It didn't take long for them to colonize the Titan forests and prairies either. Once a few lineages adapted their fungi to live in conifer, fern, horsetail, and grass, these new species absolutely thrived, spreading throughout the continents of the known world. The most abundant species today, the common leafcutter of the genus Atta, has fungi which has become highly adaptable in what plants they can digest, meaning this species is found in a wide range of habitats. While Atta tended to remain near the forests, another genus of leafcutter specialized in open prairies of glass and fern. They are quite small yet highly socially complex, living in colonies of the millions. They marched out into the open fields almost immediately after arrival, and while Atta became the dominant genus of the known world, these field leafcutters spread out beyond the known world. It seems their arrival in Hyrule occurred around 12 million years ago. They would eventually return to the known world, but we'll get to that later in the episode. As these tiny leafcutters were crossing east to Hyrule, the enormous titanosaurs were migrating west. When they reached the known world, they revolutionized the forests. Their dung has a low pH, which is generally bad for a lot of the deciduous trees in the area, yet great for the very gymnosperms that Titans prefer to eat, such as ginkgos and conifers. The new forests of flowering plants were gradually replaced by conifers and cycads, with ferns and horsetails scattered in the margins. Wetlands were an exception, as were the new grassy prairies. Titanosaurs of the known world generally don't like wet soil, so the former habitat still favored a lot of flowering plants. There were a lot of broadleaf plants and flowers, though, so ants had plenty of floral partners. Grasslands were undisturbed by the Titans and offered ample habitats where the ants had a competitive advantage over a lot of native termites, which were more used to shaded fern prairies. Leafcutters of Atta thrived in this new context. Their versatility meant that they could support their food with local flora, regardless of if it was in a Titan garden, angiosperm jungle, dense wetland, or dry forest. While many other ants, dependent on angiosperm jungles or deciduous forests, suffered, Atta specialized and outcompeted many of their distant cousins. One of the titanosaurs became firmly established in the known world. Chimeran ants would never again see the species diversity they had enjoyed for these first 2 million years. As many as 60% of ant populations in the known world belong to the genus Atta. Part of their success and extremely high population, with the largest colonies having 500 million members, although these are often technically several neighboring colonies with related queens that their children cooperate. The abundance of the ants support a wide range of animals specialized in them, along with many more that opportunistically feed on ants. Polymorphism, or distinct size and proportions in different individuals, is very common and diverse in ants. This tends to increase in diversity as the species becomes more socially complex. In the most derived species, such as leafcutter ants in the genus Atta, there are distinct body plans of male drones, several classes of female worker which often include soldiers, and of course the breeding queen. In some species, the workers and soldiers can develop a wide range of specializations. For example, the parachuting ants of the genus Cephalotes, a few soldiers of some species like the imperial turtle ant, develop a concave disc-shaped head which they can use to seal their nests in branches, which they take over from wood-boring beetles. These strange heads can perfectly seal a tunnel, allowing the soldiers to protect their colony from most threats without even having to fight. Although ants from non-American harvests can be found in the known world, most seem to have come from the Americas, such as the leafcutters. It is thought that American clades, being the first introduced after dynastic extinction, gave them a head start. Fire ants of the genus Solenopsis have been present in Kaimere since the first harvest following the dynastic extinction. They were among those who initially thrived, but took a hit when the Titans reshaped the floral composition of the forests, which impacted the food of these fire ants. Being primarily scavengers, they fared better than some other species that were specialized in plants back home. Codrath and crescent fire ants are fond of honeydew produced by aphids. These unfortunately draw them toward farmers with pest problems, as aphid food is not as common in Titan gardens. They will viciously defend the crops of their favored meals feed upon, so while fire ants don't directly harm crops, they defend insects that do, so are not an appreciated species. To make matters worse, their venom is extremely painful, and for reasons unknown, chimeras react more strongly to it than humans do. Some believe that the ant venom, especially those found in the scattered forests of northern Arvelith wetlands, is so potent to chimerans because something in the venom targets their magic. Assembly interest in this is hindered by both the organization and the chimerans that work with don't particularly want a venom potent against people with magic to be synthesized and studied, although some argue that understanding it could help develop antidotes. In practice, they are a great frustration to the Arvelith peoples and the Codrath loggers who work in the area. Another dangerous ant in the Arvelith lowlands is the arrowhead ant. A relative of the bullet ant, these predators live in small groups quite similar to Mesozoic ants. Workers are around 2 inches long, not much smaller than their queens, and being among the largest ants, aside from the hell ants. Their name comes from the pain of their sting followed by a necrotic infection, which, even if treated, looks quite similar to the circular scars left by a lot of arrowheads. The hereditary magic of chimerans means that they rarely die, but the day following a sting causes excruciating pain. Thankfully, they are not an aggressive species of ant, with intimidating mandibles, and will harass long before they sting, and only do so in self-defense. Unfortunately, they nest at the base of trees Codrath prefer for long ships. The means of the two often come into conflict, and days off from ant stings are not uncommon. Green, or weaver ants, are particularly successful in the dense angiosperm jungles of the known world and both major continents. This ant species spends their entire lives in the trees, weaving nests quite similar to the appearance and complexity of the gemweavers more abundant in gymnosperm forests. Unlike gemweavers, which spin silk as adults and can fly between branches as they spin, only larval ants produce silk, so caring for and guiding these young laborers, or taking the silk they produce, to an added complexity to their colony. Like many ants, their workers come in many morphs, with large workers foraging, defending, and expanding the colony, while minor workers remain in the colony and care for the young, while also collecting honeydew from insects kept close to or even within the nests. Because weaver ants prey on pest species and don't harm the crops, they are much more appreciated than a lot of ants, which are regarded as pests. Fire ants may not harm crops, but they don't hunt aphids and other pests, so weavers are much more preferred. Unfortunately, weavers can deliver a painful sting, so farmers can still run into trouble with them, though since they leave once they have gathered up all the insects for food or produce honeydew, they are much more appreciated than fire ants. When Housie grass returned to the known world, it brought with it a new species of ant. The Howsy grasscutter is an entirely new genus, Capomiramex. These leafcutter ants have domesticated a species of fungi that is entirely specialized in eating Howsy grass. This fungi is not a close relative of the fungi domesticated by the Howsy termite, though it is not uncommon to find ant fungi in termite mounds and vice versa. On Earth, leafcutters are an American lineage, while mound-building termites are primarily African with some Asian and Australian species, but in Kaimere, the two insects have been thrown in together. As both cultivated their fungi to be dependent on Howsy grass back in their origins on Kairul, both are now specialized and must get most of their nutrients from the grass. The ants and termites don't intentionally cohabitate per se, but the abundance of their food, coupled with the fact that ant fungi needs more stem oil while termite fungi tend to need more from the roots, means that the two are quite capable of sharing resources. They generally construct independent nests, with mounds not far from tunnels. While ants are much more often found in termite mounds, termites rarely follow the ants into their own homes, as only the smallest workers are able to navigate the colonies of the much smaller ants. Having two eusocial and extremely abundant insects can support such a high population of notoriously nutrient-poor grasses has enabled the evolution and diversity of many ant and termite specialists. While the enormous anteater and pangolin show a preference for termites, perhaps due to the roach's larger size, aardvarks and the more abundant alverosaurs are more common predators of the ant. Ants demonstrate a staggering social complexity we're still working on fully understanding. Their cooperation and abundance has drawn the attention of Chimerans in comparison between themselves and these fascinating insects. While often despised, ants do represent an interesting reflection of the entirely distinct way of being a social creature, in many ways very different from our own expressions, yet it's easy to see ourselves in these magnificent creatures. Cheers to J. Rax for sponsoring this episode. Originally I was going to have ants as a paragraph or two in last week's episode on arthropods, but I think getting time to give ants their due was most appreciated. PBS Eons has a lot of episodes on ants, which I used as a starting point for my research, and I highly encourage you to check them out if this episode was of any interest to you. Next week, we will meet the trilobites of Kaimere and their role in saving the oceans from the brink of Armageddon. Until then, stay fantastic, everyone. Cheers, folks!